Hi, my name is Clésia Mendes, and welcome to Daring the Big Leap, the interview series for people who want to transition from employee to making a living as a change worker. And in this series, I am interviewing people who successfully made the transition because we get to learn from their experience. Today's guest is Pete Bryceland. Pete is a qualified hypnotherapist, NLP master practitioner, and coach. He has worked for the last 10 years successfully providing therapeutic services to clients suffering from symptoms such as stress, anxiety, and depression. In addition, Pete coaches business owners, executives, and managers within organizations who may be feeling lonely, overwhelmed, and under the constant pressure to perform. Pete's approach allows his clients to see through the illusion of their circumstances to access a greater degree of clarity, psychological resilience, and creativity. Welcome, Pete.
Hi, thank you.
My
Hi.
pleasure. My pleasure, and I'm delighted to have you on the show today. And would you be willing to share with us what first sparked your interest into coaching?
Oh wow, okay, so that's quite a long time back, really. I used to work a long time ago for McDonald's Restaurants Limited in a management position, and I did quite a lot of management training and staff training in that, and did quite a lot of coaching, although didn't really recognise it as coaching at the time. So I left there and I became a computer programmer and a website designer, and then I ran a few online businesses and also started work with a friend of mine who ran a computer shop. So I used to go out and do network installations and computer repairs. And what I noticed was when I was going to those jobs, I would spend a lot of time talking to the business owners about their businesses and about the problems that they were experiencing in the businesses, just as a byproduct of installing computers, that sort of thing. And what I started to realize was that actually I was more interested in them and helping them solve their problems than I was in installing computers. So I did a bunch of training and set myself up as a coach. So I just started doing coaching.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so how long did it take you to make that transition?
It was quite quick, actually. I mean, I suppose if you look at the timeline, it was a few years. It was probably 3 years from when I left McDonald's to when I became a coach. But I think one of the things that really helped me make the transition was I was clear with what I wanted to do. Mm. And when I became clear about what I wanted to do and who I wanted to work with, that was quite easy. So it meant that I could be very focused in who I wanted to talk to. So as I was working, still working, installing computers, I started talking more to the business owners and telling them that I was providing this service as well. So naturally, the people that I was already meeting with, I was letting them know about the business that I was starting. And because I was doing that, they then became interested and they knew that I'd been interested in their business and I'd been helpful in the past. So it was easier for them to become clients.
Okay, that's beautiful. So what were the key milestones for you then?
I suppose the key milestones were, first of all, realizing that although I was pretty good at what I was doing in terms of the computer installations, it wasn't really why I'd left McDonald's in the first place. I left McDonald's to start a business. And I did that reasonably well with the website design, with the computer programming stuff that I'd learned, and with the computer installations, because I was self-employed essentially. But what I found was I was doing less of the things that I was passionate about and more of the things that, just brought in a little bit of regular income. Mm. So when I reflected on that and realized that for myself, I'd lost sight of the reason why I was no longer employed, it made it easy then for me to look at what I was doing and make sure that I started to build the business to serve me rather than the other way around. So.
That's a really good point that you've made there, because sometimes we start something new because we are passionate, we are curious about it, and then sometimes we may lose track as time goes by of why we got started anyway. Yes, so that's a really good point. And so, what other insights helped you throughout your journey?
Well, I suppose one of the key things was this idea of networking to build the business. So typically, businesses work best by word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So even when I talk to people now and they talk about their marketing strategies, if their marketing strategies don't involve telling people what to do, the people that they meet, or being interested in people who could potentially be their clients,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think their marketing will work. So for me, a big milestone was the whole getting over the fact that everybody that I knew wasn't necessarily potentially a client, but may know somebody who required my services.
Mm-hmm.
So it meant that it was down to me to tell them about what I was doing. And if I didn't tell them, then how would they know? Because typically, if you do things like advertising in newspapers, or I mean, we're talking about 10 years ago now when I first started.
Mm-hmm.
So you would do things like leaflet drops. Well, the problem with a leaflet drop is you maybe have to be on a leaflet drop for 6 months, or be in a magazine or a newspaper for 6 months
Mm-hmm.
before people will believe that you're an actual business.
Mm-hmm.
So you spend a long time waiting for the phone to ring. Whereas when you with people about what you do, then you're more interested in them, and they can also find out more about you.
Yes.
So I suppose a big milestone in my business was when I was having a conversation with my wife's GP mentor. So my wife's a nurse,
Mm-hmm.
and she was being mentored by one of the doctors in a local GP's practice. So we got talking, and I started talking to him about NLP and coaching, and how I thought it would be really useful for people suffering from depression.
Mm-hmm.
He found that really interesting and said, well, let's have a further conversation about this. So I met him at his office, and out of that conversation, he said to me, prove it. Because I'd been very certain that I could help people with depression. He said, well, if you can prove that, then we'll look at putting a business plan together.
Mm-hmm.
So he gave me a couple of clients to prove myself on. And on the back of that, I then started working for the next 8 years with his GP surgery, helping people with stress, anxiety, and depression.
Mm.
And that was off one conversation.
Absolutely. And what just occurred to me is that when you were having the conversation with the JP, you had no way whatsoever of foreseeing the outcome. But what he came across the caring for the people that were suffering, and say, actually, I've got these tools and this methodology that really can help people. And you were willing, when you were challenged to demonstrate, you were willing to step into that and then actually create results. So
Absolutely.
Yes, if you're working with practice, I like results a lot. If some, I know some people are in love with words, and for me, I've got action bias. If you can prove it, I'm willing. I'll show me you can do it, but it just that I only have 24 hours, so my attention span can be quite short.
Yeah, well, nothing gets results like taking action. So.
Absolutely. You get some sort of feedback always. And what sort of obstacles, insecurities, or even fears you had to overcome, Pete?
I guess the first one was charging. And I think that's true for most people when they decide to move into self-employment, whether it be as a coach or even, in a professional service or setting up a shop. It's that suddenly charging for your service and realizing the value in what you offer. So initially it was a case of, oh yes, I'm gonna charge X amount, and then it was, you start talking to people and they say, ooh, that sounds like a lot. And very soon you can listen to the wrong people and then suddenly not be charging anything for your work. which is a really quick way to go out of business.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I had to overcome was this idea that I should coach for free. So although I was willing to put my money where my mouth was in terms of demonstrating the worth of the service that I could provide, I didn't do it all for free. So although the first couple of clients was a demonstration of how good the service could be, as soon as we started looking at the business plan, we had to build in a cost. So I think that was the biggest thing to overcome, was this idea that because coaching is viewed as a soft skill, it's somehow not as worth as something that's tangible. So because it seems intangible, it sometimes is viewed as, particularly by coaches themselves, as, oh, I don't know how much I should be charging, or perhaps I shouldn't even be charging. But you have to overcome that really quickly.
You've made a really good point, several points really, because you spoke about a demonstration of how the service, how great it could be, right? So when you spoke about demonstration, I know it's quite a mundane example, but I had this idea when I go to a supermarket, and I love cheese. So there is a new brand of cheese and there is samples of cheese. So that's a demonstration. And I'll have maybe 1 or 2 cubes to find out, do I like it? Do I try? Do I want to buy more? And then if yes, I'll buy the block of cheese. And if I really love it, I'll keep buying it. But if I came back to Tesco's and take the entire block of cheese without paying, they would think that I was out of my mind. That is unacceptable. Yeah. But for some reason, people think that they can keep giving. It's a service, as you said, keep giving the service for free after the demonstration period. And it's not exactly the way it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that is the key distinction when you decide that you want to make that leap into becoming self-employed and a professional coach, is you have to do it as a profession. So if you go to any other professional service, be it a lawyer or chartered surveyor or accountant, yes, initially they'll talk to you about being a client, won't charge you but as soon as you become a client, then you're liable for their fee. And very often it's, I hear a lot of coaches and they talk about, I don't know if my client can afford my fee. And I think considerations of whether the client can afford your service should be the client's consideration when they approach you, not your consideration when you propose the work.
Right.
So when you see the value in what you do, then you present that to the client, and then it's up to the client to decide whether or not they see that value and that they want to invest in themselves in that way. We shouldn't necessarily bend to whether we could afford it, because that would be a bit like Rolex saying, well, if you can't afford us, then we'll give it you for half price. They never do that.
No.
But even in a supermarket, you don't haggle in a supermarket over you pay the price.
Yes.
And sometimes there's negotiation room, but it shouldn't be a case of, oh, well, I feel sorry for you. If a person decides that they want to engage because they see the value in it, then you should allow them to pay. Yes,
that is a great point. Set things up very clearly. And what sort of internal and external resources you were able to make use of?
I think my biggest internal resource is the fact that I like to talk to people. So I don't. It's not like I can walk in a room and I command the room, but I connect with people quite easily. So and some of that comes from NLP training. Some of it comes from just naturally being interested in people. And I think most of it comes from just this idea that connection is what we do naturally. So back when I was learning about NLP and rapport techniques, for instance, most of the rapport techniques tell you specific things like matching and mirroring and but they don't talk about the whole idea behind the intention. And the intention is to make a connection between two human beings. And when you see that person in that light, connection is very simple.
Yeah.
If you see that person as something else, or a commodity, or something to be dominated or manipulated into doing something, then you come from a very different position. But when I meet with people, I meet with another human being, and I look for that to have that connection. And when you have that connection, it's easier. So I think that's really the biggest resource that I rely on.
Yes. And that is, it's so interesting and very important. Well, it's always important, but naturally we met each other for the first time in London in one of the professional trainings, and I felt really connected to you in the sense that was like, oh, after we had a quick chat, it was like, I really like Pete. I really like to be around the content of this conversation, but not so much about the content. It's more the place where you're coming from. And we, as human beings, we do have a sense of people who have our interest in mind and the people who don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with women, I don't know if, well, we do have this myth that women have a higher sense, a sixth sense. We just pick it up, and it's a matter of only a few seconds, a fraction of seconds. And I felt very comfortable nearby you, and then we kept having conversations. That's one of the reasons why we are recording this interview today. But is that place? It felt very comfortable very quickly, because it's the place where you're coming from, and your clients get to pick up on that.
Yeah. I think another resource that I have as well that comes to mind, just from what we're talking about then, is I love language. So I love words and what words mean. And one of the distinctions I make in business and with business owners, when I work with business owners, is that they take themselves away from the idea of having a customer to having a client. So a customer typically is somebody who buys something from you. Whereas when you look at somebody through the eyes that they're a client is somebody who is under your care, who you have a responsibility for and to. And that's a whole different place to come from. If you're looking at the people in your business as customers, then you're almost, trying to sell them something. But when you view them as a client, you're acting in their best interest. They're under your care. And I think that's an important distinction for me.
Yes.
To come from that position. So I'm never really selling somebody on whether or not they should be coached, but rather I see it as my responsibility to show up and be of as much service as possible to them. And then they recognize that. That's
yes, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, and that's a much better place to come from, really.
Absolutely. And I guess that ties up, because previously you've made a really important distinction for me, is that you've made a distinction between coaches and professional coaches. So a professional coach would be someone that is at the level as lawyer, solicitor, doctor. And when you do things professionally, naturally, you'll be charging your clients, because the idea is that it is a service, it is a business to keep self-sustainable, and then you go on your further training, you need to take care of your family and so on and so forth. So it's not something that you're doing only part-time while doing something else. No, it's a different level of commitment altogether. So there is a massive difference between being a coach, which is great, can be helpful, and being a professional coach, or being a professional consultant, or being any type of that type of profession.
Yeah, but I do think that when a person's thinking about making the change from employment to becoming self-employed or setting up in business, they can run the two businesses side by side. The key distinction is that you have to view it as a business, as being professional. So even when you're starting out, you need to be professional.
Yes.
And you need to view yourself as a professional. And then that way you don't get confused with doing it as a hobby and just having friendly chats with people. And then, or actually going out and providing a service for those people.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and I think that again is a distinction that people, when they start in business, don't necessarily make. So,
Mm.
it is really important to do that right at the outset. Set yourself up as a business. Even if you are part-time, you can still be professional.
Mm. It's not linked to time, is the place you're coming from. That's beautiful. And what surprises did you have along the way?
Oh, lots. I mean, initially I thought I was just going to be working with businesses, but then after the conversation with the GP mentor, I started working with the general public with stress, anxiety, and depression. So I got really good at working with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing about that was it was such a great training ground, because you see people from all levels, all walks of life, in totally different situations, and yet intrinsically they have very much the same issues. So when I was getting referrals from the GP, and it was funded by the NHS,
Mm-hmm.
one week I might be working with somebody who hasn't worked in years and is on benefits. The next day I might be working with somebody who'd just been made redundant from a high performing executive job, or
Mm.
somebody who was off with executive stress, or a stressed out new mum. There was such a range, but what that these people can have the same problems.
Mm.
So they're not separated by position. They're not separated by whether they're male or female. They're not separated by any of that. They're all humans having human problems, which
Mm.
which is a great leveler, really, because then when you see, very often people think that working with like executive level clients, that they're somehow different, and they're
Mm.
really not. They still have the same insecurities. They still, have the same self-doubts. They still, they still live their lives the same as everybody else. They may be in an elevated position at work, but they still have the same thoughts and feelings as any other human being. So, and if
That's
you,
the yes, yes, sorry.
I was just going to say, and if you start from that position every single time, then you can't fail to make an impact. So,
That's beautiful. I was about to ask, can you share a specific story, naturally without giving me any details, because it's too specific details, because it's confidential.
yeah. In what respect?
Um, so you, for example, you mentioned that you work with different markets or different audiences. For example, an executive story, someone that you helped that maybe they were stressed out, burned out, and then something changed, or maybe a business owner in that respect. Yes.
Sure. So I was working with a senior executive in the local NHS,
Mm-hmm.
and as it turned out, she had feelings of being a fraud, which was really surprising, because all her peers all respected her, because she was a very capable businesswoman, very good at her job. She'd had a history of every position she'd ever been in. She'd really done well, but for some reason she didn't feel that she deserved to be in the position that she was in currently. She thought that somehow she was just lucky to get it, and it was a case of turning her attention back to, actually, if you look over the last sort of 10 years at the achievements that she'd made, she did deserve to be in that position. But because she discounted all that and not noticed for herself that, she was full of self-doubt, so she would keep quiet, and I was brought in really because she was struggling to settle into that position. And it turned out that she didn't see herself as worthy of that position. But as soon as she started to see herself as worthy of that position, she really stepped into the role table. So,
Oh, That's beautiful.
So, and do you know what's interesting about that is that I have clients who are GP referred, so they're less advantaged, and they don't think that they deserve to be where they are.
Mm.
So, or even deserve to have the things that they have that they should be grateful for.
Mm.
And a lot of the time, it's just because they're not looking at themselves and what they've done and what they've been able to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, whether you're an executive or whether you're somebody who works in the supermarket, you can still recognize your own self-worth. So, and I like to use a lot of metaphors. So one of my favorite stories is a story of ancient Egypt, and they're building his pyramid for him, and he decides that he's going to take the architect and go around and have a look. So he's wandering around his architect, and he sees a chap chipping away at some stone blocks, and he walks up to him and he says, so what is it you're doing then? He says, oh, well, my job is just to chip away at these blocks until they're perfectly square so they all fit together. And he's like, all right, very good, excellent. So he carries on walking around, he talks to a few more people, and then he comes upon an old lady who's sweeping the floor. And, you know, she looks very proud and very pleased. And he says, oh, you look very pleased. You know, what's your job? And she said, oh, I'm helping to create one of the biggest masterpieces the world will ever see. You know, and I love that as a thought, that even though she's sweeping the floor, she sees her part in creating that masterpiece. And very often people are so focused on their little part that they don't see the big picture of what they're actually helping to create.
Mm. Wow. And Pete, what would you say to someone who's looking to make the leap from employee to making a living as a change worker?
First of all, make sure that you're clear on what you want to do. So it's very easy to say, okay, yeah, what I'd love to do is this, whatever this is, and then jump ship and go do it. But if you're not clear on what that thing is and the people that you're going to serve, then it becomes very difficult. So I was reading an article recently from Jamie Smart, and he was talking about a metaphor of you can drive in the dark in fog with your headlights on and only see as far as your headlights can go and make a whole journey. Mm-hmm. And that's a really useful metaphor. And one of the key things that he talks about is that you have to have that destination in mind, first of all. So you can make that sort of journey, but you have to know where you're going, and how you'll know that you've got there. So very often I find when I'm working with business people is that they're kind of driving around in circles in the fog because they've forgotten where they were going. So I think one of the biggest things, if you're looking to make the leap into becoming a change worker, is to be really sure about what you want to do and who you want to serve. Because as soon as you're sure about who you want to serve, then they'll start showing up because you'll start seeing them in your life. But if you're not sure, if you're just, oh, well, I'll work with anybody, the problem with working with anybody is that they won't know, and you won't know who it is. So typically when I'm talking to friends or family and they ask me what I'm doing, I'm actually quite specific with who I work with. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is then they know then that if they meet somebody who might benefit from my service, that's somebody they can refer to me. Okay. But if I just said, oh, I'll work with anybody, then, you know, they're not going to be convinced, and you're not going to be convinced either. So it makes it much more difficult. But when you're clear about who you want to work with, that's when, you know, you can really sort of like start to make headway.
I paused there because I wanted to show you if you were completed or if you were just having a little pause. So, if I were to ask you, so who specifically do you work with at the moment, Pete? What would you tell me? Who is your ideal client?
Okay, so my ideal client currently, the people that I'm working with at the moment are small business owners, either people who are what we would call a solo entrepreneur, or somebody who works in a professional service with a very small team. So perhaps chartered surveyors or small accountancy practice. Also, I'm working currently with a landscape architect. So he's a lone worker, does a lot of his work in his office on his own, but also likes to get out and about and meet people. Now, one of the things that I look for in a client is somebody who either has a purpose and has forgotten it, or is in business and didn't realize that they had a purpose. So I help to reconnect them with the purpose for their business, and then help them build that business in a way that serves them. Typically, most small business owners are working in a business that gives them a more than full-time job. And they're so busy doing that job that they're not really running a business. So that's who I currently work with most effectively, is those small business owners that seem to be really stressed out because their job is too busy and they're not really running a business. And I help them get back to running a business and getting in touch with what they were passionate about in terms of running that business to begin with.
Okay, that is wonderful, Pete. So if people want to get in touch with you, how can they reach you?
So I have a website. It's just my name, so it's bryceland.co.uk. And if they want to email me, they can email me at pete@bryceland.co.uk. So I like to keep things fairly simple in terms of contact. So about 15 years ago, I registered bryceland.co.uk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just my name, which is the easiest way of finding me. So.
Yes, it's quite congruent. So for people who want to find me, they can either go to www.facebook.com/Clésia.Mendes. So that would be facebook.com/CLESIAMENDES. Or you can go straight to my website. So that would be www.clesiamendes.com. Pete, thank you very much for being this episode of Daring the Big Leap. Any final parting words for our audience today?
I think if you're really keen on making the leap, then have faith in yourself, and most importantly, let other people know what you're up to, because they're the people that can most help you build your business.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Pete. See you soon.
Well. See you. Bye-bye.